I get between 3 and 4. That's a pretty good wine. Not a lot of wines will do that. Very few wines will get to 5. Damn few get to 4, for that matter. You get to 3.5 and feel, well, today's a good day. We could do this again tomorrow. We could do this again tomorrow and we get 2.5 seconds. The fact is that the weather, the time of day, there are a lot of factors that go into that. Your ability to taste wine varies dramatically throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month. Has a lot to do with barometric pressure and things like that. But let's not get into that much of a mystery right now. We'll save that for Neyers Merlot 201. We'll do the 101 course today. So, now you not only know all there is to know about me, you know all there is to know about my Merlot. Anybody have any questions, comments, observations? Bear in mind that I'm relatively thin-skinned. So. Okay. Well, I want to thank you for your time.
How much of your past did you bring into your wine, and how much of your recipe or your methodology is novel?
Oh, that's probably the question to ask too. I think I just saw a chef here a moment or so ago, and I think you could ask him the same question. How much of what you do in the kitchen, here he comes, how much of what you do in the kitchen is what you were taught, and how much is what you developed yourself? I think chefs and winemakers have a lot in common for that very reason. We develop a lot of recipes as winemakers. At the same time, we have a lot of fundamental rules. But those rules are also constantly evolving. We've already determined that I started to learn to make wine in 1972. The way I've made wine in 1972 through 1980 is dramatically different from the way I make it now. I've learned that I can be a lot riskier now. I've learned the importance of organic farming now. I want my grapes farmed organically, not just because they surround my home and I've got 2 dogs and 3 children, and to say nothing of my own health and that of my wife. We want to farm organically because I know I get healthier vines that are more consistent over the long term. Well, those are things I didn't know in 1972. I could get into more technical aspects of it, like the yeast that we used to use in fermentation, the malolactic starter bacteria that we used to use when we made wine, the French oak barrels that we used to use versus now, our interest in controlling every aspect, which is what we used to do. We were control freaks in the 70s and 80s, 90s. I ascribe a lot of that to Generation Y too. The Generation Y people that are in my life are my kids. But we've had a number of employees that have worked for us over the years that have questioned some of these methods. And they'd say, well, why do you do that? I said, well, because that's the way I was taught. I said, well, had you ever thought of doing it this way? I hear they do it this way at this place in France, or this place in Germany, or this place in Italy. So we tried it. Sure enough, the wine tasted better. So I'd say probably 50% is what I was taught, and 50% is evolutionary. Great question, though. Thank you.
What do you like to pair your Merlot with?
Oh, you know, I think I'm a lousy food pair. So I tend to pair my Merlot with the things that I like to eat the most. There's a wonderful dish that my wife makes for me occasionally when I come back from France. My trips to France normally take 2 to 3 weeks. So my wife was always kind of happy to see me for the first day I'm back, and she makes what the French call a daube. That's spelled D-A-U-B-E. When I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, my mother called it pot roast. But she didn't use any wine in it. The French used red wine in it. And a daube is basically a relatively tough but very flavorful piece of beef that's been slow cooked for, after being braised on the outside, it's then slow cooked for 2 or 3 hours in a sauce that has a little bit of wine reduction in it. And I just love that. I kind of look for, I call her 2 or 3 days before I come home and say, how's the daube coming? And I'll have a bottle of my Merlot when I get back from 2 weeks in France. And if I happen to get lucky and get the daube, I'm okay with that.
What other varieties of wine do you make?
We make several varieties of wine. The grapes that I grow on my ranch are Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. I'm sure you've all heard of both of those. Those are red grapes that have a historical connection to the region of southwestern France called Bordeaux. I also personally like Zinfandel, but the weather on my property isn't conducive to growing Merlot. It's a little too cool. We can't get Merlot ripe. So I buy some Merlot grapes from a grower who has a vineyard in an area that's more properly suited to Zinfandel. I also make Chardonnay. Chardonnay is the largest, by a little bit, production item that we make. So Chardonnay, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Zinfandel. And we fiddle around a lot. I'm no longer the winemaker at the winery. My other jobs have taken enough of my time that I hired someone. I hired a really wonderfully talented winemaker, very gifted young man who's worked with me for about 10 years now. And he came to me a couple of years ago and said, I'd really like to go to France with you on one of your trips. And I said, great, come along, get a passport, I'll buy you a plane ticket, join me for 2 weeks. And it was probably the single best investment I ever made. His eyes were, I picked him up at the airport in the morning that we left, and he was a little bit tired, maybe a little bit crabby about having to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. When I brought him home, he had so much energy, I think he worked for 6 days straight. And he's come back to me since then and said, wow, we should really make Pinot Noir, don't you think, Bruce? I said, well, if you really want to go to the trouble to find a Pinot Noir vineyard, I'm not going to plant it on my property. He found a great Pinot Noir vineyard, made a wonderful Pinot Noir. We don't make much of it. We make 60 or 70 cases. Our total production at Neyers Winery is about 12,000 cases a year. To put that in perspective, Robert Mondavi Winery, I'm sure all of you are familiar with Robert Mondavi Winery, makes about 450,000 cases a year. They do in one day what we do in a year. Doesn't mean it's any better or any worse, it just means that it's a different game plan. Gallo, the world's largest winery, makes, I think, 8 million cases of wine a year. In the total scheme of things, the 12,000 or so cases that we make at Neyers puts us probably in the, I'd say the lower 25. Chris, what do you think?
Probably about right, yeah.
The lower 25% of the wineries in the Napa Valley. So we're in the smaller 1/4 percentile, if you will, and 2/3 of the wineries in the Napa Valley, or 3/4 of the wineries in the Napa Valley make more wine than we do.
Bruce, this Merlot that we're trying right now pairs very well with the prime rib or any of your great meat products that we have right now. What, from the time it's picked to the time it's ready, what's the timeline in that for this Merlot?
Well, that's a great question too, but it varies a lot depending upon personal tastes. And you'll find, I suspect, if you become wine enthusiasts, as I did, that your tastes change over time. When I first started to enjoy and learn about wine back in the early 70s, I really thought a wine had to be old to be great. And I don't think that too much anymore. I really like wines that are relatively young. This is the 2007 vintage Merlot, Chris?
Yes.
Okay. I'm drinking the 2006 vintage of this at home, but I've got some 2005 that I like, and I've got a few bottles of the 2001, which is a vintage that I was always very fond of. But I tend to drink the wines maybe a year after they've been released.
Great.
But that changes, as I say, dramatically from person to person and throughout a person's life or drinking experience. Yes, sir.
I know that the different years, the different, the weather that year, all of those kind of things affect that year's batch. I guess the hardest thing to do when you've just started drinking wine is to be able to tell one wine from another, just developing your palate. How did you get your palate to the point where you can enjoy the 2005 over the 2006? Or it's a difficult.
I don't know how that. I'm not really sure how that happened, but I can tell you it happened to me, and it's happened to almost everyone I know in the wine business. It's a little bit like driving a car with a standard transmission. When I learned to drive an automatic, and my older sister, had a car with a stick shift, and I could never. She always would let me borrow it. I just couldn't drive the damn thing. And one day I just had this, a moment, and I thought, so that's it. Yeah, you clutch, take your foot off the gas, you shift, and it happened. I think that feeling comfortable with wine is really what makes that happen, and you feel comfortable with anything through practice. The fact that you all are involved in a restaurant, particularly an enlightened restaurant that has an enlightened wine program, gives you a great opportunity. And I don't know how many of you plan to stay in the restaurant business for the rest of your lives. Probably you don't either. But the fact of the matter is that learning about wine and learning about food with the opportunity that you have available to you right now is really pretty extraordinary. Don't pass it up. Don't pass up the opportunity to learn about wine and to learn about food while you're here. There's a lot to be learned. And the more you learn, the more you try, the more comfortable you'll become, and the easier you'll find it one day to say, oh, you know, I had the 04 last night and I don't like it as much as I like this 2000. I prefer the 2000. Nobody's ever going to teach you that. Yes, sir.
What is the future of Neyers Vineyards? I mean, where do you intend to go? You said 12,000 cases. Do you intend to stay small, or are you looking?
Oh no, I think we'll probably stay pretty small. My children, as I mentioned, came to my wife and me late in life. They're all in their late teens. One's 22 and the others are in their late teens. So there's no real succession plan. I don't know if they're going to be interested in it, and frankly, if they were interested, I'd be a little suspicious. They're all in college right now, and they're having the time of their lives. My oldest daughter wants to be a veterinarian, my middle daughter wants to be a history professor, and my son wants to be a rock musician. Have at it, man. I would have loved to have done any one of those three things. If you decide that at some point you want to come back to California, grow grapes with me, and I'll teach you how to make wine, fabulous. But if not, my life will still be whole. At some point they'll then have to decide what to do with the winery, but I suspect that those things have a way of taking care of themselves. We've got a really beautiful state-of-the-art building. I urge you, if you ever come to California, easily Googleable. That's a word. Google me and look it up and come on by and pay us a visit. It's a small winery, but it's very attractively situated in the mountains in the eastern part of the Napa Valley. We've built a state-of-the-art production facility there, and the winery is capable very easily of moving into another generation, whether it's my children or they decide to sell it. Wow, you guys are great to talk to. I wish all my days were this pleasant. You didn't even quibble about the price of the grapes. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate what the Ruby Tuesday organization has done for us. We really appreciate the opportunity to get better acquainted with you, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with all of you telling my story.
Thanks. And one more quick question for the servers here. What's the simplest way to describe your wine when you're selling it to the tables?
That's another great question, but I think there are three things that make sense. First of all, the wine is completely naturally made. The grapes are organically grown. The wine is made using natural old world techniques. We have no additives in the wines. We don't fine the wines. We don't filter the wines. So we have no manipulation. Completely natural winemaking is very important to us.